Imagine waking up, fully expecting the dawn, but the sun is just gone. You step outside into the morning air, and instead of sunlight, the sky is this hollow, suffocating gray. There's no warmth, no light, just an endless, creeping twilight. The birds have stopped singing. The air feels unnaturally still and cold. You wait for hours, but true morning just never arrives.
You know, when we think of the darkest times in human history, our minds usually jump straight to world wars, catastrophic pandemics, or massive economic collapses. But over 1,400 years ago, a disaster struck that was so sudden and so incredibly strange that the people living through it genuinely thought the world was ending. They didn't have the internet, they didn't have modern science or any kind of warning. They were just abruptly plunged into a waking nightmare that spanned the entire known world. That year was 536 AD. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to dig into what historians widely consider the absolute worst year in human history. A year where Earth itself seemingly turned against humanity, completely rewriting the fate of empires and casting millions into the abyss.
Okay, let's dive right into this with part 1, the sun went dark.
Back in the year 536, these bizarre, terrifying reports started popping up across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. The ancient Byzantine writer Procopius actually lived through this nightmare, and he described it with this chilling simplicity. He wrote, "The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon." I mean, just imagine the sheer psychological terror of that. For over a full year, daylight looked weak, pale, and sick. Every single day felt like an endless freezing sunset. People had to light candles at noon just to find their way around their own homes. And out in the fields, crops just sat there, bathed in this ghostly blue-tinged twilight, completely unable to grow. So what actually caused the sky to die? You have to remember, people at the time were absolutely paralyzed by fear. They genuinely believed they were witnessing the wrath of angry gods or horrific curses or literally the apocalypse. Commoners and kings alike were just waiting for a dawn that refused to break. But modern science points to a massive, hidden culprit that no one alive back then could have ever possibly comprehended. Today, researchers know it was a gigantic volcanic eruption. It likely happened in Iceland or somewhere else in the northern hemisphere, basically tearing the Earth apart with an unimaginable amount of force. This catastrophic explosion launched millions of tons of ash high into the atmosphere, creating a dense veil that choked out the sunlight across the entire globe. Global wind currents then caught that dark shroud and carried it across continents, plunging millions into a manufactured, endless night. And trust me, this was literally only the beginning. Which brings us to part 2, the world freezes. The immediate consequences of losing the sun were absolutely devastating. I mean, without normal sunlight, global temperatures just completely plummeted, and the very seasons basically inverted. Summer became violently cold. We even have records showing that snow fell during the vital growing seasons in parts of China, completely crushing their fragile agricultural cycles. Over in Europe, crop fields produced absolutely nothing, just dead plants and frozen dirt. The deep frost shattered the soil, destroying root vegetables and killing off livestock. And any families who miraculously managed to survive one bad harvest were immediately hit by another one right after. Naturally, the food vanished. Grain prices skyrocketed. Everyday hunger rapidly turned into widespread famine. And the thing about famine is, it turns starving neighbors into desperate enemies. When a whole society is starving, the rules change incredibly fast. The strong take whatever they want, and the weak simply disappear. Villages essentially became ghost towns as people wandered the barren countryside, completely desperate to quiet the agonizing pain in their stomachs. Civilization itself began to crack.
And that leads us to part 3, global chaos.
It is so crucial to understand that this wasn't just an isolated local tragedy. This was a synchronized global collapse, striking multiple continents at the exact same time. Over in Ireland, ancient records document years of total bread failure, which wiped out massive swaths of the population. In China, devastating frost, widespread famine, and mass death actually destabilized entire ancient dynasties. Across Europe, kingdoms that were already spread thin by war began to completely collapse from the inside out. Global trade basically died. Entire economies broke down. Imagine countless ancient manuscripts and histories burning as whole communities were just completely erased from existence. And through all of this, no one knew why it was happening. The agonizing dread of millions of people who believed their world had literally been cursed overnight is hard for us to even wrap our heads around today. They were trapped in the freezing dark. Fathers had to watch their children waste away, totally isolated in a pre-industrial world where the collective misery felt completely inescapable. But honestly, the real horror was still coming.
Because now we hit part 4. Then came the plague. Just when these desperate survivors thought the absolute worst was over, it got worse. We basically transitioned from famine and darkness straight into a sequence of total doom. In 536, the sun dies. By 538, global famine hits its peak. And then, in 541, a weakened, freezing, and starving global population is suddenly slammed by the Justinian plague. The survivors of the Great Freeze now had virtually zero immune response left to fight off what was essentially an unstoppable biological nightmare.
541 AD. That is the exact year an early outbreak of the bubonic plague violently erupted and spread like wildfire through the Byzantine Empire. It swept through busy port cities and major trade routes with a terrifying speed, largely carried by fleas on rats that were just as desperate for shelter and warmth as the humans were.
And then came death. The cities literally filled with corpses. The graveyards overflowed so quickly that bodies had to be stacked out in the streets. In Constantinople alone, it's reported that thousands of people were dying every single day. The sheer devastation was so absolute that the empire never fully recovered its former glory. First came the darkness, then the hunger, then the disease.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's wrap this up with Part 5, Why It Matters.
Why do historians so definitively point to this as the worst time to be alive? Well, by analyzing tree rings, ice cores, and surviving ancient records, modern researchers have uncovered the scattering scale of this nightmare. The year 536 didn't just ruin a single harvest. It triggered an entire decade of unrelenting agony. Continuous crop failures decimated entire generations. Years of compounding economic destruction wiped out centuries of human progress. Widespread political instability permanently reshaped the map of the world. Millions suffered, all because of the slow, grinding chain reaction that kicked off in that one dark year.
Experts call this the worst year to be alive, not because of human warfare, and not even because of a single disease, but because nature itself literally turned off the lights. The sky itself became the enemy. The very environment that humanity completely relied upon suddenly turned hostile, which really proves just how fragile our civilization truly is. It really all comes down to a matter of perspective, doesn't it? Today, we complain about bad traffic, rainy weather, or slow internet. But back in 536 AD, people woke up under a dead sun. They had no harvest to eat, no medicine to take, no answers to their prayers. Just the blind, suffocating dread of watching people starve in the streets, day after miserable day. It really makes you reconsider what a bad year truly means.
So, the next time you think you're having a bad year, just think of the people of 536. History may never see another year quite like it. It leaves you wondering, if the sky went completely dark tomorrow, how long would our modern world actually last? If you enjoyed diving into this dark history and exploring forgotten disasters, make sure to subscribe now, because as we've just seen, the past was far more terrifying than fiction,